High Counselor Vexthera leaned forward on its platform, and Jake could see rows of sharp teeth when it smiled. The expression was not friendly. Around the chamber, other council members shifted in their seats as if preparing to watch an entertaining show. There is a conflict in the Omega sector that has raged for 50 standard years, Vexthera began. Two species called the Korthani Empire and the Brutari clans have been fighting over territorial rights to a cluster of resource-rich worlds. The fighting has become increasingly savage and threatens to spread to neighboring systems. Jake listened without interrupting, though he noticed that several council members exchanged glances when Vexthera mentioned the Omega sector. Something about their body language suggested there was more to this story than they were sharing. Previous council mediators have attempted to resolve this conflict. Vexthera continued. All have failed. 3 have been killed by the warring parties. The Korthani are a militaristic species that believes only strength matters. The Brutari are savage raiders who respect nothing but violence. Both consider diplomacy to be a sign of weakness. Another council member spoke up from across the chamber. This one looked like a giant insect with multiple arms and compound eyes. The situation requires someone expendable, it said in a voice like grinding metal. Someone whose loss would not damage relations between the council and their homeworld. Jake felt a chill run down his spine but kept his expression neutral. They were essentially telling him this was a suicide mission, while pretending to offer humanity a chance to prove itself. The setup was obvious, but Jake had expected something like this. We understand the risks, Jake said calmly. When would you like us to depart for the Omega sector? Vexthera's black eyes seemed to gleam with satisfaction. Immediately. A council transport will take you to the edge of the conflict zone. From there, you will proceed alone to make contact with both factions. You have 30 standard days to achieve a lasting peace agreement or admit failure, and return to Earth in disgrace. Jake bowed slightly. We accept these terms. I will need to collect my military advisor and gather some basic intelligence about both species before departure. Intelligence has already been prepared, Vexthera said quickly. Your advisor is unnecessary. This is a diplomatic mission, not a military operation. With respect, Counselor, our diplomatic protocols require a military escort for missions in active war zones, Jake replied politely. Captain Tucker is experienced in conflict resolution and will be invaluable in understanding the tactical situation. Several council members made agitated sounds. The insect-like being clicked its mandibles rapidly while a blob-shaped creature changed colors from blue to angry red. Vexthera raised one clawed hand for silence. Very well, the High Counselor said with obvious reluctance. Your escort may accompany you, but understand that the Council will not be held responsible for any casualties that result from this mission. The formal session ended quickly after that. Jake was escorted back to the docking bay where Ryan was waiting with barely controlled impatience. The captain had clearly been listening to communications chatter and his expression was grim. This is a setup, Ryan said quietly as they boarded their transport ship. I've been monitoring Council frequencies and they're already discussing how to divide up Earth's territory after we fail. Jake nodded as he settled into his command chair. I know. But sometimes walking into a trap is the only way to spring it. Properly. The journey to the Omega sector took 3 days, during which Jake and Ryan studied everything they could find about the Korthani Empire and Brutari clans. The intelligence provided by the Council was basic and focused mainly on military capabilities, rather than cultural information. Jake found that suspicious, since understanding an alien culture was essential for successful diplomacy. Dr. Kevin Walsh joined them by quantum communication link from Earth. The xenobiologist had been studying both species since humanity first learned of their existence. His insights were more valuable than all the Council's official reports combined. The Korthani evolved from pack hunters on a high-gravity world, Walsh explained during one of their briefings. They value strength and tactical excellence above all else. Their society is rigidly hierarchical, with advancement based entirely on military achievement. And the Brutari, Jake asked. Completely different, Walsh continued. They're nomadic raiders who developed on a resource-poor world. They take what they need through force, but they also have complex honor codes about worthy opponents. Both species should respect strength, but they define it very differently. Jake studied the tactical displays showing the current battle lines in the Omega sector. The fighting had been going on so long that entire generations had grown up knowing nothing but war. neither side seemed capable of achieving decisive victory, but both were too proud to accept anything less than total surrender from their enemies. When they reached the edge of the conflict zone, Jake made a decision that surprised both Ryan and the council observers monitoring their mission. Instead of requesting permission to enter the system or attempting to contact military commanders through proper channels, Jake broadcast an open message on all frequencies. "This is Jake Morrison representing Earth and the Galactic Council," his voice carried across the battlefield where dozens of ships from both factions were engaged in running battles. "I am here to mediate your conflict, and I request an immediate meeting with Commander Zeklon of the Korthani Empire and General Mordak of the Brutari clans." The response was immediate. Weapon locks from both fleets targeted their small ship, while angry voices demanded they identify themselves properly and follow established protocols. Jake ignored the threats and continued broadcasting. "I will be on the surface of Omega Prime in 6 hours at the coordinates I'm transmitting now. Both leaders will come alone or with minimal escort. We will discuss terms for ending this war that has cost both your peoples so much." Ryan stared at Jake in disbelief. "Are you insane? They'll kill us the moment we land." "Maybe," Jake agreed, "but they'll also be curious. I'm betting that 50 years of stalemate has made both sides desperate enough to at least listen to something different." The communications channels erupted with chatter as both fleets tried to figure out who this human was and why he thought he could simply demand a meeting with their military leaders. Jake listened to the translations provided by their ship's computer and noted that most of the responses focused on his apparent arrogance rather than outright rejection. 3 hours later, they received confirmation that both Commander Zeklon and General Mordak would attend the meeting. The Korthani message was formal and precise, stating exact numbers of escort troops and weapons that would be present. The Brutari response was a simple roar of what the computer translated as either laughter or a battle cry. Jake spent the remaining time before the meeting reviewing everything they knew about both leaders. Zeklon was a career military officer who had risen through the ranks by never losing a battle. Mordak was a tribal war chief who had united several Brutari clans through personal combat and cunning raids. As their ship descended toward the surface of Omega Prime, Jake could see the scars of 50 years of warfare covering the landscape. Ancient cities lay in ruins while new fortifications dotted the terrain. The meeting site Jake had chosen was in neutral territory near the wreckage of what had once been a beautiful temple complex. "Last chance to call this off," Ryan said as they prepared to disembark. Jake checked his sidearm and made sure his diplomatic credentials were easily visible. "The council thinks they're sending a weak human to die in an impossible situation. Let's see how long that misconception lasts." The ruins of the ancient temple provided an appropriately dramatic setting for what might be Jake's final diplomatic meeting. Broken columns reached toward the sky like grasping fingers, while carved stones told stories of civilizations that had vanished long before either the Korthani or Brutari had discovered spaceflight. Jake walked slowly through the debris field, noting defensive positions and escape routes out of pure habit. Commander Zeklon arrived, first with a precision that would have impressed any human military officer. His shuttle landed exactly at the designated coordinates and disgorged a squad of Korthani soldiers who immediately established a perimeter. The Korthani were tall humanoids with pale blue skin and large eyes adapted for their homeworld's dim red sun. Their movements were controlled and efficient as they secured the area with military precision. Zeklon himself was an impressive figure, even by Korthani standards. He stood nearly 7 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms that showed the muscle development of someone who trained constantly for combat. His uniform was spotless and covered with medals that indicated participation in dozens of major battles. When he saw Jake waiting alone near the temple's central altar, his expression showed obvious confusion. "You are the human mediator?" Zeklon asked in accented but clear English. "Where is your military escort? Where are your advisors and support staff?" Jake gestured toward Ryan, who stood about 50 meters away near their landed shuttle. "Captain Tucker is monitoring communications. I prefer to keep initial meetings simple and direct." Before Zeklon could respond, a loud roar echoed across the ruins as the Brutari contingent announced their arrival. General Mordak's ship was a converted raider vessel covered in weapon scars and painted with tribal symbols that hurt to look at directly. The landing was controlled chaos, with the ship touching down hard enough to crack the ancient stones beneath it. The Brutari who emerged were everything the intelligence reports had described and more. They stood shorter than the Korthani, but were built like living tanks with thick armor plating that seemed to be part of their natural skin. Mordic himself was a massive specimen with ritual scars covering his arms and face. His eyes glowed with an inner fire that suggested he was always ready for violence. So the council sends a small pink creature to tell warriors how to fight. Mordak growled as he approached. His voice was like rocks grinding together, and his translator unit seemed to struggle with some of his more colorful expressions. This should be entertaining. Jake stood calmly between the two alien leaders, neither backing down nor showing any sign of intimidation. Thank you both for coming. I know this conflict has personal meaning for both your peoples, and I don't expect easy solutions. Zeklon's military bearing was perfect, but Jake could see surprise in his large eyes. You speak as if you understand warfare, human. What battles have you fought? What worlds have you conquered? Earth, Jake replied simply. It took us several thousand years to unite our own planet, and we're still working on keeping the peace. Mordak laughed, which sounded like an avalanche. One small world? The Brutari have raided across 50 systems. We take what we need, and leave our enemies to mourn their weakness. And yet you've been fighting the Korthani for 50 years without decisive victory, Jake observed. Either they're stronger than you thought, or you're not as effective as you claim. The Brutari general's glowing eyes narrowed dangerously, and several of his warriors reached for their weapons. Zeklan's soldiers responded by raising their own rifles. The situation balanced on the edge of violence for a long moment, before Jake continued speaking. I've studied the tactical reports from this conflict, he said conversationally. The battle patterns are interesting. Both sides show excellent tactical skill, and neither has made the obvious strategic errors that would explain such a long stalemate. Both alien leaders looked at Jake with new attention. Zeklan lowered his hand in a gesture that made his soldiers relax slightly. You have studied our battles, human? What conclusions have you reached? Jake pulled out a small data pad and displayed a three-dimensional map of the Omega sector. Red and blue indicators showed the positions of major battles over the past 50 years. Your tactics are sound and your strategies are logical. But look at the timing of supply disruptions and intelligence failures. The holographic display zoomed in on specific incidents. A Korthani supply convoy destroyed just hours before a major offensive. Brutari raid plans somehow leaked to defenders who were perfectly prepared. Peace negotiations sabotaged by mysterious third-party attacks that were blamed on the other side. Someone has been manipulating this conflict, Jake said quietly. Someone with access to intelligence from both sides and the ability to influence supply lines and communications. Mordak's scarred face twisted into a snarl. Impossible. The Brutari trust no outsiders with our secrets. Neither do the Korthani, Zeklan added firmly. Our security protocols are absolute. Jake nodded thoughtfully. I believe you, which means the interference is coming from someone you wouldn't consider an outsider, someone both sides trust enough to share information with. The implication hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Both alien leaders understood what Jake was suggesting, but neither wanted to admit it was possible. The Galactic Council had been the only neutral party with access to both factions throughout the conflict. You accuse the Council of deception, Zeklan said carefully. That is a serious charge that would require substantial proof. Jake gestured toward the ruined temple around them. The proof is right here. This world and the others in the Omega sector contain some of the richest quantum crystal deposits in the galaxy, the same crystals that power Council technology and serve as the basis for their interstellar economy. Mordak's warriors were now listening intently to the conversation. The general himself had gone very still in the way predators do before striking. Continue, human. A war keeps both sides too busy to properly exploit the resources, Jake explained. But Council observation posts and monitoring stations have been established throughout the sector for the past 50 years. Officially, they're here to observe and report on the conflict. Jake activated another display on his datapad showing orbital scans of the sector. Dozens of Council facilities were scattered across the contested worlds, all positioned near the richest crystal deposits. The pattern was obvious once someone thought to look for it. My ship's sensors detected active mining operations at 17 Council sites, Jake continued. The extracted crystals are being transported to Council. Worlds on ships registered as humanitarian supply vessels. Zeklin's face had gone pale blue, which Jake took as a sign of extreme anger in Korthani physiology. They have been stealing from us while we died fighting each other. Worse than stealing, Mordak growled. They have been feeding our hatred to keep us distracted while they plunder our worlds. The two alien leaders looked at each other across the ruins, and Jake could see 50 years of enmity beginning to transform into something else. The revelation of council manipulation was changing everything about how they viewed this conflict and each other. If this is true, Zeklin said slowly, then we have been fools. Worse than fools, Mordak agreed. We have been tools. Jake waited quietly while both leaders processed the implications. He could see their military minds working through the possibilities and reaching the same conclusions he had arrived at days earlier. The question now was whether they would be willing to work together against their common enemy. What do you propose, human? Zeklon asked finally, assuming your accusations prove correct. Jake smiled for the first time since the meeting began. I propose we give the council exactly what they think they want. A weak human diplomat who fails to stop your war. Both alien leaders stared at him in confusion. Then slowly understanding began to dawn in their eyes, and Jake saw the first glimmers of respect replace their initial contempt. You want us to continue fighting, Mordak said with growing appreciation. While you do something else. While we do something else, Jake corrected. This stops being your war and becomes our war the moment you both decide the council has been your real enemy all along. The next 3 weeks transformed the Omega sector in ways that would have seemed impossible just a month earlier. To outside observers, the war between the Korthani Empire and Brutari clans continued with the same savage intensity that had characterized the conflict for 50 years. Battle reports flowed regularly to council monitoring stations showing continued stalemate and mounting casualties on both sides. What the council observers could not detect was the careful coordination behind the apparent chaos. Jake had established a command center in the ruins of an ancient fortress deep underground, where Korthani technical expertise merged with Brutari tactical innovation under human strategic oversight. The combination was proving more effective than anyone had anticipated. Commander Zeklon stood before a holographic display showing the positions of every council installation in the sector. His pale blue features were set in concentration as he studied the attack patterns Jake had developed. Your plan requires simultaneous strikes on 17 targets across 4 different systems, he said thoughtfully. The timing will be critical. General Mordak examined a different display showing the deployment of combined forces for the operation. His scarred face showed approval as he traced attack routes with one clawed finger. The Brutari understand lightning warfare, human. We strike hard and fast before enemies can respond, but your approach adds new elements to consider. Jake moved between the displays, highlighting specific tactical details. Human military doctrine focuses on achieving maximum impact with minimum resources. We don't try to match enemy strength directly. Instead, we identify critical vulnerabilities and exploit them systematically. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than attacking council forces head-on, Jake had identified the support infrastructure that kept their operations running. Communication relays that coordinated mining schedules, supply depots that stored extracted crystals, transport hubs that moved stolen resources off-world. Destroy the infrastructure and the entire network would collapse. Your species thinks differently than ours, Zeklon observed. Korthani's strategy emphasizes overwhelming force applied at decisive points. We seek to crush enemies through superior firepower and tactical positioning. Brutari warfare is about speed and surprise, Mordak added. We strike where enemies are weakest and fade away before they can organize responses. But you combine both approaches with something else. Jake nodded as he pulled up another tactical display. Humans excel at seeing patterns that others miss and finding connections between seemingly unrelated factors. We also have experience fighting enemies that are larger and more powerful than we are. The truth was that Jake's background went far deeper than simple diplomatic training. He had spent 15 years in Earth's most elite special operations units before transitioning to diplomatic service. His expertise was in asymmetric warfare, where smaller forces used intelligence and innovation to defeat larger conventional armies. Captain Ryan Tucker entered the command center carrying the latest intelligence, reports from their reconnaissance missions. Council monitoring stations are reporting normal battle activity to their superiors, he announced. They have no idea that yesterday's engagement between Corthani and Brutari forces was actually a joint training exercise. Jake smiled at that development. Getting two species that had been killing each other for 50 years to work together had required careful handling. The breakthrough had come when both leaders realized they respected each other's military skills, despite their political differences. Professional soldiers could appreciate good tactics regardless of which side used them. Phase 1 is complete, Jake announced to the assembled officers from both fleets. All reconnaissance targets have been mapped and infiltration routes identified. Phase 2 begins tomorrow with the insertion of advanced teams. The advanced teams were small groups of volunteers from both species who would position themselves near critical council installations. Their job was to disable security systems and mark targets for the main assault. It was dangerous work that required them to trust each other completely despite decades of conditioning to see the other species as enemies. Dr. Kevin Walsh appeared on the main communication screen from his laboratory on Earth. The xenobiologist had been working around the clock to analyze captured council technology and provide technical support for the operation. I've completed my analysis of the quantum crystal mining equipment, he reported. The extraction process leaves distinctive energy signatures that should be detectable throughout the sector. Can you trace where the stolen crystals have been shipped? Jake asked. Already done, Walsh replied with satisfaction. Council transport records show regular shipments to 7 different council worlds over the past 10 years. The total value exceeds the gross domestic product of most civilized planets. The evidence of council corruption was now overwhelming, but Jake knew that proof alone would not be enough. The council was too powerful and too well established to be brought down by mere accusations. They needed to be caught in the act and exposed in a way that could not be denied or covered up. Tomorrow we move to Phase 3, Jake announced. Joint strike teams will hit all 17 targets simultaneously. The goal is to capture intact evidence while disrupting their operations completely. Commander Zeklon raised a concern that had been troubling him. The Council will respond with overwhelming force once they realize what is happening. Their fleet assets in this sector outnumber our combined forces by a factor of 3 to 1. Which is why we're not going to fight them directly, Jake replied. Human military history teaches us that the side with better information usually wins regardless of numbers. We know where they are, but they don't know where we are. We know what they're planning, but they don't know what we're planning. General Mordak's eyes glowed with anticipation. Explain this strategy, human. How do small forces defeat large ones? Jake activated a training simulation that showed historical human conflicts where smaller armies had defeated larger ones through superior tactics and intelligence. We make them react to us instead of acting according to their own plans. We force them to fight on our terms using our rules. The simulation showed how human forces had consistently used mobility and surprise to negate enemy advantages in numbers and firepower. Quick strikes followed by rapid withdrawal, multiple simultaneous attacks that divided enemy attention, false targets that drew forces away from real objectives. Your species has considerable experience with this type of warfare, Zeklon observed with growing respect. How many times have humans faced superior enemies? Every major war in our history, Jake replied honestly. Humans rarely have the advantage in numbers or technology. We've learned to win through adaptability and determination. The final briefings took place in separate sessions with Corthani and Brutari forces. Each species would attack targets suited to their particular strengths, while following an overall coordination timeline that Jake had developed. The Corthani would handle heavily defended installations that required precision and overwhelming firepower. The Brutari would target isolated facilities where speed and surprise would be most effective. As the command center emptied, Jake remained behind, studying the tactical displays one more time. Ryan approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and handed one to his friend. You realize this plan is completely insane, the captain said conversationally. Probably, Jake agreed. But it's also the only way to expose the ERE Council's corruption and prevent them from starting. More wars for profit. Ryan sat down heavily in one of the Corthani designed chairs, which was slightly too large for human proportions. The Council is going to be furious when this is over. They'll probably declare war on Earth just out of spite. Jake took a sip of coffee and considered that possibility. Maybe. But they'll also be dealing with investigations from dozens of other member worlds who will want to know if their conflicts have been manipulated too. Plus, they'll have to explain why they've been stealing resources from active war zones. The next few hours would determine whether Jake's plan succeeded or whether the Council's manipulation of galactic conflicts would continue unchallenged. Everything depended on perfect timing and flawless execution by forces that had been enemies until very recently. "Get some rest, Captain," Jake said finally. "Tomorrow we find out if the Council really thought they were dealing with a weak human diplomat." The attack began exactly at dawn across 4-star systems simultaneously. Jake watched from his command center as reports flowed in from 17 different strike teams hitting Council installations throughout the Omega sector. The coordination was perfect with each team, reporting successful infiltration and target acquisition within minutes of the planned timeline. "Commander, Zeklon's forces struck the heavily defended mining platforms with typical Corthani precision. Their assault ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation and overwhelmed the surprised Council defenders before any warning could be transmitted. General Mordek's raiders hit the isolated supply depots with devastating speed, leaving only wreckage and confused survivors behind. Phase 1, complete," Captain Tucker reported from his monitoring station. "All primary targets secured with minimal casualties. Enemy response time was exactly what you predicted." Jake nodded as he studied the tactical displays showing Council fleet movements throughout the sector. High Counselor Vexithara was reacting exactly as expected by dispatching overwhelming force to crush what appeared to be a desperate alliance between the Corthani and Brutari. The Council fleet was massive and would arrive at the battle zone within 6 hours. "Initiate Phase 2, Jake ordered. "All strike teams withdraw to secondary positions and prepare for evidence extraction." The real objective of the operation was not to hold territory, but to capture proof of Council corruption that could not be denied or suppressed. Teams throughout the sector were now downloading mining records, shipping manifests, and communication logs that documented 50 years of systematic theft and manipulation. Dr. Walsh appeared on the main communication screen with excitement evident in his voice. "The data we're receiving is incredible," he announced. "Not only do we have proof of illegal mining in the Omega sector, but the records show similar operations in 12 other conflict zones throughout Council space." Jake felt a cold satisfaction as the scope of Council corruption became clear. They had not just manipulated one war, but had been profiting from conflicts across the galaxy for decades. The evidence would destroy the Council's moral authority and trigger investigations that would take years to complete. "Sir, we have a priority transmission from High Counselor Vexithara," the communications officer reported. "He's demanding immediate contact with you." Jake accepted the transmission and Vexithara's massive crystalline face appeared on the main screen. The High Counselor's black eyes burned with rage and his voice carried barely controlled fury. "Human Morrison, you have violated every treaty and agreement between the Council and your primitive world. Surrender immediately or face complete annihilation." "Counselor Vexithara," Jake replied calmly. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The Corthani Empire and Brutari clans have discovered evidence of unauthorized Council activities in their territory. They've asked for human assistance in investigating these irregularities." Vexithara's scales darkened with anger. "You dare accuse the Council of wrongdoing? We have brought peace and stability to this galaxy for 3,000 years. Peace built on manipulation and theft, apparently," Jake replied as he transmitted the first batch of evidence files. "Perhaps you can explain why Council mining operations have extracted billions of credits worth of quantum crystals from worlds claimed by other species." The silence that followed was profound. Vexithara's expression shifted from rage to something approaching panic as the implications became clear. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Worse for the Council, it was already being transmitted to every major world in the galaxy. Those operations were legitimate resource surveys authorized under Council emergency powers, Vexithara said, but his voice lacked conviction. The extracted materials were held in trust pending resolution of territorial disputes. Held in trust on Council worlds where they were sold to finance other operations, Jake countered. "We have the shipping records, Counselor. We have the sales agreements. We have communication logs showing coordination with arms dealers who prolonged conflicts to maintain profitable mining opportunities." Commander Zeklon's face appeared. In a secondary window on the communication screen, High Counselor the Korthani Empire formally withdraws from all treaties with the Galactic Council pending a full investigation of these criminal activities. General Mordak joined the communication from his flagship. The Brutari clans declare the Council to be oathbreakers and thieves. We claim the right of blood vengeance against all who participated in this deception. Jake could see the desperation growing in Vexthara's eyes as the political situation collapsed around him. Other council members were undoubtedly receiving similar evidence packages and would soon be facing angry delegations from their own worlds. You have no authority to make these accusations, Vexthara said desperately. Earth is a probationary member with no standing to challenge council decisions. Earth is acting as a mediator between two sovereign powers who have discovered theft of their resources, Jake replied. We're simply documenting evidence and facilitating communication between interested parties. The final blow came when Dr. Walsh transmitted the complete analysis of council operations throughout the galaxy. 12 different conflicts spanning centuries of manipulation, trillions of credits in stolen resources, millions of deaths caused by wars that had been artificially prolonged for profit. The evidence is being transmitted to every major news network and political leader in council space, Jake announced. I suspect you'll be receiving quite a few urgent communications over the next few hours. Vexthara's image flickered and died as the High Counselor terminated the communication. Jake could imagine the chaos that was erupting in council chambers as the full scope of their corruption became public. Knowledge. Sir, we're receiving communications from 17 different worlds demanding emergency council sessions. The communications officer reported. Also, Admiral Carter is requesting permission to bring the Earth Defense Fleet to full readiness. Jake considered that request carefully. The Council might attempt to blame Earth for exposing their corruption, and could try to destroy the evidence by eliminating everyone involved. Grant Admiral Carter's request but maintain defensive positions only. We don't want to give them any excuse to claim we started a war. The next several hours brought a steady stream of developments as the scandal spread throughout Council space. 3 Council members resigned immediately, while others demanded investigations of their colleagues' activities. Several worlds announced they were suspending their Council membership, pending reform of the organization. Commander Zeklon and General Mordak arrived at Jake's command center together for the first time since the operation began. Both alien leaders looked exhausted but satisfied as they studied the reports flowing in from across the galaxy. Your strategy was more effective than we anticipated, human, Zeklon said with genuine respect. The Council's authority has been shattered and their military power neutralized without firing a shot against their main fleet. Better than effective, Mordak agreed. We have turned their strength against them and exposed their weakness for all to see. This is warrior thinking of the highest order. Jake felt a deep satisfaction as he watched the tactical displays showing Council forces withdrawing from contested territories throughout the galaxy. The immediate crisis was over, but the larger work of reforming galactic governance was just beginning. What happens now? Ryan asked as he joined the group around the command table. Now we help build something better, Jake replied. The Korthani and Brutari have agreed to joint administration of the Omega sector, with Earth providing technical assistance. Other worlds are forming their own alliances independent of Council control. 6 months later, Jake stood once again on the observation deck of a transport ship, watching a massive space station grow larger in the viewport. This time, however, he was approaching the new galactic assembly that had been established to replace the discredited Council. Representatives from 47 worlds had gathered to create a more democratic and transparent system of interstellar governance. High Counselor Vexthara and 8 other Council members were awaiting trial for corruption and war crimes. The Omega sector had become a symbol of successful cooperation between former enemies. Most importantly, the galaxy was learning that humans were not the weak primitives they had appeared to be. Jake smiled as he remembered Vexthara's final transmission during the crisis. The High Counselor had demanded to know how a weak human diplomat could have orchestrated such a complete victory. Jake's response had been simple. You looked for weakness and found humility. You expected failure and found patience. You demanded submission and met determination. Your greatest mistake was believing that quiet strength is the same as weakness. The Council had thought him weak, but they had been very wrong indeed. Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of the transport ship, watching the massive structure grow larger in the viewport. The council station looked like a small moon made of metal and crystal, hanging in space around the planet below. Ships from dozens of different worlds moved around it like insects around a bright light. Some were so large they could carry entire cities, while others were sleek and fast like deadly arrows. Jake had never seen anything like it in his 35 years of life. The journey from Earth had taken 2 weeks using humanity's newest faster-than-light drives. The technology was still new to humans, and Jake felt sick for most of the trip. His stomach had only just settled when the pilot announced they would dock in 1 hour. Jake looked down at his simple black suit and wondered if he should have worn something more impressive. The other human diplomats had suggested military dress or formal robes, but Jake preferred to keep things simple. A soft chime indicated someone was at his door. Jake turned to see Captain Ryan Tucker entering the observation room. Ryan had been Jake's friend since their days in the military academy 20 years ago. Where Jake was quiet and thoughtful, Ryan was loud and confident. The captain's uniform was perfect as always, with every medal and badge in exactly the right place. "Still nervous about this meeting?" Ryan asked as he joined Jake at the viewport. "The council specifically asked for you by name, so they must think highly of human diplomacy." Jake almost smiled at that. The truth was more complicated than Ryan knew. The council had not asked for Jake because they respected him. They had asked for what they called the weakest human leader available. Jake had seen the intercepted communications that Ambassador Maria Santos had shown him before departure. The alien leaders thought humans were soft and primitive. They wanted someone they could easily intimidate and dismiss. "I think they have different expectations than you might imagine," Jake said carefully. He had not told Ryan about the real reason for his selection. There was no point in making his friend worry about something they could not change. The docking process took another hour as various alien officials inspected their ship and cleared them for entry. Jake watched through the security monitors as beings in strange suits examined every inch of their vessel. Some looked almost human, while others were so alien that Jake could not figure out which end was the head. One creature appeared to be made entirely of gas held together by a mechanical suit. When they finally disembarked, Jake felt the artificial gravity shift slightly, making him stumble. Ryan caught his arm and steadied him. The docking bay was enormous, with ceilings that stretched up so high they disappeared into shadows. Hundreds of different alien species moved through the area, going about their business. The noise was incredible, with sounds ranging from musical tones to grinding mechanical noises to what might have been screaming but could have been laughter. A figure approached them from across the bay. It stood nearly 8 feet tall on 4 legs that ended in clawed feet. Its skin was covered in what looked like silver scales, and its head was long and narrow with large yellow eyes. When it spoke, its voice came from a translation device attached to its throat. "Human Morrison," the alien said without any greeting or introduction. "I am Protocol Officer Zilkin. You will follow me to the council chambers immediately. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not touch anything. Do not stare at the council members." Jake nodded politely. "Thank you for the guidance. This is Captain Tucker, who will be serving as my military advisor during these proceedings." The alien's eyes narrowed. "The council did not authorize additional personnel. The captain will remain here." Ryan stepped forward with his hand moving unconsciously toward his sidearm. "I'm afraid that's not acceptable. Human diplomatic protocol requires a military escort for all official meetings." Zilkan's scales seemed to darken. "Human protocol is irrelevant here. You will comply with council directives or face immediate expulsion from the station." Jake placed a gentle hand on Ryan's shoulder. "It's all right, Captain. I can handle this meeting alone. Please wait here and monitor communications in case Earth needs to be contacted." Ryan looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew Jake well enough to recognize when his friend had made a final decision. "I'll be monitoring on all frequencies," Ryan said. "If you need anything, just call." The walk to the council chambers took 30 minutes through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. The walls were covered in symbols and artwork from dozens of different cultures. Some sections were beautiful beyond description, while others were disturbing in ways Jake could not explain. Zilkin maintained a brisk pace that forced Jake to walk quickly to keep up. They passed through several security checkpoints where more aliens examined Jake with devices that hummed and beeped. One scanner seemed to look right through his clothes and skin to examine his bones and organs. Another device took samples of his breath and analyzed them in seconds. Jake submitted to each examination without complaint, though he noticed that Zilkan seemed surprised by his cooperation. The council chambers were the most impressive space Jake had ever seen. The ceiling arched hundreds of feet overhead and was covered in what looked like real stars. The chamber was circular with 12 raised platforms arranged around the edges. Each platform held a different alien representative, and each one was more intimidating than the last. At the highest platform sat High Counselor Vexthera. The being was massive even while seated with crystalline scales that caught and reflected the chamber's lights. Its eyes were completely black and seemed to look right through Jake as if he were not even worth noticing. When it spoke, the chamber's acoustics carried its voice to every corner. "So this is humanity's chosen representative," Vexthera said with obvious contempt in its voice. "How disappointing. We had heard stories of human warrior diplomats who conquered entire worlds through force and cunning. Instead, they send us someone who looks like he would flee at the first sign of danger." Several other council members made sounds that might have been laughter. Jake stood quietly in the center of the chamber and waited. He had learned long ago that silence was often more powerful than words. "Human Morrison," Vexthera continued, "your species has been granted probationary membership in our council, only because you demonstrated faster than light travel. However, many of us question whether primitive worlds like Earth deserve a place among civilized species. We have decided to give you an opportunity to prove your worth." The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the environmental systems. Jake could feel 12 pairs of alien eyes watching him and waiting for his response. He took a deep breath and prepared to hear what would probably be an impossible task designed to ensure human failure. "We are honored by this opportunity," Jake said simply. "What would the council have us do?"